All right, so get this. Today we are going deep, really deep on something that might sound a little crazy at first.
Oh.
We're going to compare modern capitalism to feudalism.
Whoa.
Yep, you heard right. We're going to be talking knights and lords and peasants.
Okay.
But in the context of skyscrapers and boardrooms and all that,
Interesting.
it's wild. And all this is coming from this text we're diving into called The Feudalistic Nature of Capitalism. And let me tell you,
Yeah.
this thing is a real eye-opener.
It really is. It's interesting how this text really makes you rethink the way we usually think about economic systems.
Right.
Like, we tend to think of capitalism as this big step forward, Like, we finally broke free from those old rigid hierarchies of the past.
Yeah, for sure.
But what if it's not that simple? What if instead of like a total break, capitalism just kind of like, I don't know, evolved those old power structures,
Right.
just in sneakier, newer ways?
Okay, I'm hooked. I'm in. But hold on, let's back up a sec. Feudalism, we've all got that image in our heads. Lords, they've got the land.
Yeah.
Peasants are tied to it, can't really move up in the world.
Right.
But how does that even connect to today's world? I mean, think about it. Corporations, global markets, where are the castles? Where's the moat?
Well, okay, so think about it this way.
Like,
In feudalism, where did all the power come from?
the land.
Exactly. Controlling the land meant you had the wealth.
The reason.
You controlled the means of survival,
Okay, yeah.
But today, it's less about physical land.
Right.
It's about capital,
Like money.
money, assets, owning shares of companies,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
So who's got their hands on all that capital?
It's still a pretty small group, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Corporations, a handful of really wealthy individuals,
Sounds kind of familiar, right?
just like those lords from way back when.
Okay, so instead of peasants tied to the land, we've got workers who are dependent on those wages, just scraping by, a lot of them.
Right? A lot of them.
But I mean, people can change jobs, right? They can move, start their
Correct.
own businesses even. That's got to count for something.
So that's where it gets more,
Complex.
complex, nuanced, all that.
Okay.
The text actually calls it neo-serfdom.
Whoa, neo-serfdom.
Yeah.
That's a little intense, don't you think?
Well, hear me out.
Oh,
On paper, yeah, workers today have more freedom, technically,
sure.
but the reality for a lot of people, I mean, it can feel a lot like that same old dependency we were talking about.
So, okay, I kind of see where you're going with this, but neo-serfdom. Cameron, that feels a tad dramatic. No.
Well, think about the gig economy.
Okay.
You've got millions of people out there doing freelance work, driving for delivery apps, all that.
Yeah, yeah.
And on the surface, it does seem like, oh, wow, freedom and flexibility, sign me up, right?
Right, yeah. The dream.
But you got to look deeper. These folks, a lot of times, no benefits,
Right.
no job security, and they're always hustling for the next gig.
Yeah, just to pay the bills.
Exactly.
They're at the mercy of algorithms, these big platforms. It's like
It is like the peasants relying on the lords,
mood.
Yeah, like his mood, his
It's
goodwill.
swapping one kind of dependency for another, And even outside the gig economy,
Yeah.
people working 2, 3 jobs, barely getting by,
Right.
always worried about that next medical bill or something,
And the text is saying that lack of security,
Yeah.
that vulnerability, that's what keeps workers dependent on employers.
Right, like the serfs back in the day.
Relying on the Lord for basically everything.
Okay, so we've got the power structures, the dependency, not on land anymore, but on wages.
Right.
But with feudalism, land, it wasn't just about the economics of it all. This was
Yeah.
about social standing,
Yeah,
influence, who you were. Your whole identity was tied to the land.
absolutely.
Does the text make that connection to modern capitalism? What's the land now?
It's definitely more than just money. I mean, think back to feudal society. Land was everything.
It was.
Is the source of food,
Yeah.
resources, your social status.
Where you belonged, your community.
Exactly. But today, that whole idea of land has expanded.
Okay.
It's not just physical land anymore. It's the resources, the industries,
Access to information.
all those things. That's what makes up modern life.
So it comes down to who controls those things, right? Those essential parts of our lives. Those are the new levers of power.
That's it.
Okay. Can you give me an example of how that plays out?
Well, look at the housing crisis, right?
Oh, yeah.
Rents sky high.
In a lot of places, yeah.
And a lot of people, they're spending most of their income just to keep a roof over their heads.
Right.
Just like those peasants busting their butts to pay the Lord for the right to work his land.
It's like this never-ending cycle of just trying to survive, you know?
Exactly.
They're not tied to the land, literally.
Right?
But it sure feels like they're tethered to their landlord.
Or to the back.
Yeah, the mortgage lender. They don't really have a choice.
Yep.
And that keeps them stuck.
Keeps them dependent.
Okay, so the text calls this debt peonage, which is, wow, okay, another heavy one.
Yeah.
But it's basically saying that this is our modern version of that feudal dependency.
That's it.
It all comes down to who benefits from the system and who's just struggling to get by.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
All right, so we've got these, like, these pretty clear parallels between the power structures of feudalism and modern capitalism. But those feudal lords, they ruled over their own little kingdoms, their fiefdoms, right?
Yeah.
What's the modern day version of that?
Yeah. Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
You've got these massive multinational corporations.
Yeah.
The big players in industry and tech.
Right.
I mean, they're not just companies anymore. They're practically empires.
Yeah, for real.
They control so many resources. They influence markets.
They even have a say in government policies.
Oh, yeah, they're like those lords.
They've got the power.
Right. But instead of castles and armies,
They got factories and supply chains.
the lobbyists.
Oh, the lobbyists.
Yeah.
So, like, think about Amazon with its, like, massive online empire. Or Google, they control so much data. It's crazy.
Right.
Are those, like, the modern fiefdoms?
That's exactly what the text is saying.
Ew.
These companies, they've created these super complex systems,
Yeah.
really efficient systems, but they hold immense power
Yeah.
over consumers, over workers, even whole industries.
That's a lot of power.
It is. They can control prices, dictate terms to suppliers, influence the flow of information, just like those lords in their little fiefdoms.
And just like back then, there's a lot of room for exploitation, right?
Oh, yeah.
People to the top.
They have the power to extract wealth from those who depend on them.
Right. It's like history repeating itself in a way,
And the text argues that this concentration of power, this creation of these corporate fiefdoms, it creates a system that only really benefits those at the top.
While everyone else is just trying to keep their head above water.
Struggling for basic fairness and security.
Wow. Okay. You're making me look at all those skyscrapers and tech campuses a little differently now.
Really?
Yeah. It's like I can almost see like the ghost of feudalism hiding behind all the glass and steel.
I love that image.
Right. It's kind of creepy, but it makes you think.
And that's the point, right?
Yeah.
The text argues that if we can see these patterns...
Recognize how the past is still present in our economic systems.
Exactly.
Then we can actually start thinking about how to create a fairer
More
and equitable future.
Yeah.
All right, I'm in. Let's do this. Okay, so my mind is officially blown wide open here. I'm starting to see, like, these feudal shadows everywhere I look now. But there's one thing we haven't really gotten into yet.
What's that?
How this whole system keeps itself going. I mean, think about it. Feudalism, they had that whole divine right of kings thing.
Right.
To justify why things were so rigid, so hierarchical.
Yeah.
What's the story that modern capitalism tells itself? The story that keeps things running smoothly, keeps everyone in their place.
That's such a good point. Just like any system that has power, it needs a good story, right?
Absolutely.
Capitalism runs on those narratives, those stories we tell ourselves to explain why things are the way they are, to make it all seem legit.
So what's the big story? The one that keeps modern capitalism chugging along?
Well, I think one of the biggest ones, the one we hear all the time, is this myth of the meritocracy.
Oh, yeah, the classic pull yourself up by your bootstraps narrative.
That's the one. The idea that anyone, no matter where they come from, can climb the ladder, achieve success, all that.
Right, as long as they just work hard enough.
Exactly. Work hard, you'll make it. It's all on you.
And it's a powerful story.
It's so powerful.
But it really fits in with our whole, individualistic culture.
It does, yeah.
But here's the thing. It ignores all those systemic barriers that are out there.
Yeah.
The things that actually prevent people from moving up, no matter how hard they try. It's like telling those medieval peasants, hey, if you just put in a little more elbow grease, you could have been a lord too.
Exactly.
It's like they totally forget that the whole system was designed to keep those peasants down.
It completely disregards that, yeah.
And by putting so much emphasis on individual responsibility, it kind of shifts the blame.
Totally. It takes the focus away from the inequalities that are built into the system itself.
It's like saying, hey, if you're born into poverty, Or if you don't have access to good education, that's your problem. You're just not trying hard enough.
It's a really convenient way for those at the top to avoid any responsibility, isn't it?
Yeah, it lets them off the hook for creating a system that only benefits a select few.
It does. But if this meritocracy story is so flawed, how does it manage to stay so convincing? Like, why do people still buy into it?
That's a good question. I mean, it's everywhere you look.
It is. Well, the text argues that it's because this story is constantly being reinforced by a lot of things, actually.
Like what?
Well, for one, look at our consumer culture.
Okay. Yeah.
We're bombarded with messages telling us to buy more stuff, upgrade our lifestyle, chase that perfect image of success.
It's like a never-ending cycle of wanting more, right?
It is a treadmill of desire and consumption.
So it's not just about the economic systems themselves. It's about the psychology behind it all. The desires, the distractions that keep people focused on individual achievement.
And not on questioning the system itself.
It's brilliant, if you think about it, even if it is kind of messed up.
It is, yeah. Keep people chasing that carrot on a stick.
And they won't even notice the bigger picture.
Exactly.
But who's holding the stick, you know?
Yeah.
Who's the one pushing this meritocracy myth and this whole consumerist frenzy?
Well, the text points to a few culprits.
Well, yeah.
One of the biggest ones is the media.
Okay, how so?
Well, in a capitalist society, who controls most of the media?
Corporations, right?
Big corporations, and they have a big stake in maintaining the status quo, keeping things the way they are.
It's like those medieval scribes who wrote history from the king's point of view.
It is a modern version of that.
So the stories we hear, the news we consume, it's all filtered through this corporate lens.
That's right. It's designed to support the narratives that keep those in power.
Like downplaying stories about inequality.
Or highlighting those individual success stories.
The ones that fit perfectly into that meritocracy myth.
Exactly.
So we're basically being fed a carefully curated version of reality.
A version that makes the system seem fair and just.
And benefits those at the top.
Mm-hmm.
It's getting a little Orwellian, don't you think?
It can feel that way, yeah. Like we're living in this constructed reality and we don't even realize it.
So, okay, if we're seeing all these parallels between feudalism and modern capitalism, where does that leave us? Like, what about the future?
Yeah, good question.
Are we headed for some kind of, like, neo-feudal dystopia?
The text doesn't shy away from those potential dangers.
Okay, so what does it say?
It argues that if these trends keep going unchecked, if the wealth gap keeps widening, if workers are increasingly exploited and marginalized,
then yeah, we could be heading towards a society that looks a lot like feudalism.
In some really disturbing ways.
So paint me a picture. What does that look like?
Well, imagine a tiny elite, the new aristocracy, if you will.
Okay.
Controlling vast amounts of wealth and resources.
Right.
While the majority of people are stuck.
Struggling just to make ends meet.
Working in precarious conditions.
With no chance of ever moving up.
That's the potential future the text lays out.
It's a pretty bleak picture.
It is. And the text warns against becoming complacent, against accepting this as some kind of inevitable fate.
So what can we do?
It argues that we need to be aware of these trends.
Right.
Question the stories that support them.
Challenge those narratives.
And most importantly, resist the forces that are pushing us towards that neo-feudal future.
Okay, so it's not all doom and gloom.
No, not at all.
There's still hope. We can still change course. But how? What can we actually do to break free from these tendencies and create a society that's truly fair and just?
Well, unlike historical feudalism, which was pretty static and unchanging, capitalism is constantly evolving.
Okay.
It's dynamic, adaptable.
So we can change it.
Exactly. We can shape it, mold it into something better.
That's a huge relief to hear, honestly.
So the text highlights a few paths we can take.
Like what?
Policy reforms, labor movements, technological advancements, all sorts of things.
Okay, so break that down for me.
We need to push for policies that promote economic justice, support those organizations that are fighting for workers' rights.
And use our collective power to hold those in power accountable.
Exactly.
That's giving me a little bit of hope back, you know? It's a good reminder that we're not just powerless bystanders in all of this.
Not at all.
We can actually make a difference.
We can, and we have to.
But where do we start? What can people actually do?
There are so many ways to get involved, honestly.
Okay, give me some examples.
Support organizations fighting for economic justice, for fair labor practices.
Get involved in local politics.
Push for those policy changes that create a more level playing field.
Right, and even just talking about these things, raising awareness.
Oh yeah, that's huge. Have these conversations with your friends, your family, your coworkers.
Spread the word, get people thinking.
Exactly. The more we shine a light on these issues,
The more we challenge those dominant narratives,
the more likely we are to see real lasting change.
it's like that saying, a single spark can start a fire, right?
I love that.
Even small actions can make a difference, especially when we join forces with others.
Collective action, that's where the real power lies.
And hey, it's important to remember, change doesn't happen overnight.
It takes time.
Patience, persistence.
And a belief that a better world is possible.
So for anyone listening who might be feeling a little inspired, a little fired up,
Or maybe a little overwhelmed by all of this,
wow, that's a lot.
just remember, you're not alone.
There are tons of people out there working towards a more just and equitable future.
Find your people, find your voice.
And get involved.
The future isn't just something that happens to us.
We create it through our choices, our actions, our willingness to fight for something better.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
It's crazy, right? We start talking about feudalism, like castles and knights and all that. It feels so ancient, so far removed from our lives.
Well, right?
But the more we've dug into this idea of capitalism having these feudalistic tendencies,
Yeah.
the more I realize it's not just some, abstract theory.
It's not just an academic exercise.
It's actually super relevant to our lives.
It affects us every day.
Like, it really makes you wonder what future historians are going to say about us,
Yeah, I've thought about that.
Will they look back and be like, wow, they totally let those neo-feudal tendencies take over?
Or will they see this as like a turning point?
Yeah, like the moment when people finally woke up and started pushing back, building something better.
It's a big question.
It is. And I guess the answer isn't written yet, right?
No, not at all.
We're the ones writing it right now with the choices we make.
With our actions, our willingness to challenge the way things are.
Okay, so let's bring this back to our listener for a second. We've covered a lot of ground here. Power structures, economic dependency, that whole meritocracy myth, the media's role.
Yeah, it's a little...
It can feel kind of overwhelming, to be honest. So for someone out there who's maybe feeling fired up but also a little lost, what's a good first step? What can they actually do to, resist these neo-feudal tendencies?
Well, I think the most important thing is to stay engaged,
What do you mean?
It's easy to just get caught up in the day-to-day. Just go through the motions and accept things the way they are.
Tune it all out.
Exactly. But once you start to see these patterns, once you recognize these echoes of feudalism in our modern systems, it's hard to ignore them.
Yeah, it's like you can't unsee it.
Mm-hmm.
But knowledge is only powerful if we actually do something with it.
Right.
Right. So how do we turn that awareness into action?
Well, I think it starts with being more mindful,
Mindful of what?
of the choices we make, as consumers.
Okay. So think about the businesses we support.
The products we buy.
Yeah.
Ask yourself, are they aligned with my values?
Are they treating their workers fairly?
Are they contributing to a better future, a more sustainable world?
It's like voting with our wallets,
Oh,
right?
that's a good way to put it.
But sometimes it feels like those individual choices, they're just a drop in the bucket.
I hear you.
How do we make a bigger impact?
Well, that's where collective action comes in.
Okay.
Supporting those organizations that are out there, fighting for economic justice, pushing for better labor practices.
Working to change those policies that create such an uneven playing field.
That's where we can really start to shift things to make a real difference.
So find those groups, those movements that are already working towards a better future.
Yeah.
And support them, whether it's through volunteering, donating, or even just spreading the word.
Every little bit helps.
And don't forget the power of conversation, right?
Right.
Talking to our friends and family about these ideas.
Challenging those old narratives, those stories we've been told.
Getting people to think critically about the systems we're all a part of.
It all starts with a conversation.
Like that old saying, a single spark can start a fire.
Love that.
Even small actions can have a ripple effect, especially when we connect with others who feel the same way.
Who share our values and our vision for a better future.
Okay, so change doesn't happen overnight, right? We know that.
It takes time.
It takes work.
Patience, persistence, and a belief that a better world is possible.
So to our listener out there, if you're feeling inspired or maybe a little intimidated by all of this, just remember,
You're not alone.
there are so many people out there who are working towards a more just and equitable world.
Find your community. Find your voice.
And get involved.
The future isn't something that's just handed to us.
We create it.
Through our choices, our actions, our willingness to stand up for what we believe in.
That's a wrap on our deep dive into the feudalistic nature of capitalism. We hope it's given you some new insights, some food for thought, and maybe even a little bit of that fire in your belly to make a difference.
Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a world where everyone has the chance to thrive.
We'll see you on the next Deep Dive.